Diana Mercer was the invisible woman everyone saw but no one noticed, mopping floors at Mitchell Air Force Base for 3 years while bearing silent witness to the mockery until the day Colonel Reeves spotted the distinctive West Point graduation ring beneath her rubber gloves, and the entire base discovered they'd been disparaging one of the most decorated tactical strategists in modern military history. The midnight blue jumpsuit hung loose on her slender frame, the name patch reading simply Diana stitched above the breast pocket. At 42, her weathered face rarely wore makeup, and her steel gray hair stayed tucked beneath a plain navy cap that shadowed her eyes as she worked. The maintenance staff badge clipped to her belt marked her status at Mitchell Air Force Base, essential enough to be allowed on the premises, invisible enough to be forgotten the moment she left a room. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. For 3 years, Diana had moved through the sprawling Oklahoma facility like a ghost, pushing her janitorial cart down polished hallways where officers strode with purpose and enlisted personnel bustled with efficiency. She kept her head down, her movements economical, her presence minimal. The janitor's closet on the East Wing had become her sanctuary, a place to retreat during breaks while others gathered in the cafeteria or lounged in common areas. Today was like any other, or it should have been. Diana worked methodically through her morning routine, starting with the administrative offices before most personnel arrived. The early hours were easier, with fewer people to navigate around, fewer conversations that hushed when she entered a room. She had just finished mopping the hallway outside Conference Room B when the first group of officers rounded the corner. "Watch the wet floor," she said quietly, gesturing to the yellow caution sign. Lieutenant Jessica Hargrove, impeccably dressed in her service uniform with not a blonde hair out of place, barely glanced at Diana before striding directly across. "The wet tiles. We have a briefing in 5 minutes," she said over her shoulder to the 2 captains following her. "Some of us have actual responsibilities around here." One of the captains, a tall man with a carefully maintained mustache that skirted regulation limits, chuckled. "I think cleaning up after us counts as responsibility, Lieutenant." He made a point of wiping his shoes on the dry section of floor before continuing, leaving distinct smudges on Diana's freshly mopped surface. Diana said nothing, just adjusted her cart position and continued working. This was routine, the small indignities, the casual dismissals. She'd learned to let them wash over her like rain on a window. By mid-morning, the base was in full swing. Diana had moved to the officers' wing, emptying trash bins and dusting surfaces with the same quiet efficiency she brought to every task. Outside the junior officers' break room, she could hear raised voices and laughter. She paused, recognizing a conversation pattern she'd heard many times before: the storytelling, the one-upmanship, the need to impress. "I'm telling you, 3 tours in Afghanistan, and I never saw anything like it," came a male voice she recognized as Captain James Whitley. "The insurgents had no idea we were coming. Perfect execution." "Your perfect execution still required extraction support from my unit," countered a female voice. Major Lisa Reynolds, Diana thought, though she rarely put faces to the voices. She heard through doors. Diana continued her work, moving slowly enough to hear the conversation without appearing to eavesdrop. This was how she'd spent 3 years, listening, observing, gathering information no one realized she possessed. "Speaking of execution," said a new voice, lower and with the distinct accent of someone from Boston, "has anyone seen the simulation? Results for Operation Sandstorm. Complete disaster." Diana's hand paused briefly on the doorframe before resuming its motion. Operation Sandstorm, the tactical training exercise scheduled for the following week. She'd seen the preliminary briefing materials when cleaning Colonel Bradley's office after hours, noted the flawed approach to the mountainous terrain scenarios, observed the dangerously optimistic timeline for the southern approach, The generals. Coming down hard on the tactical team, continued the Boston voice. Says they're overthinking it. Wants a more aggressive approach. More aggressive means more casualties, said Major Reynolds. A dismissive snort. That's why we run simulations, Major. Better to lose virtual soldiers than real ones. Diana finished her work and moved on, her cartwheels squeaking slightly on the polished floor. As she turned the corner, she nearly collided with a group of junior officers headed to the break room. The youngest, a fresh-faced lieutenant who couldn't have been more than 24, stepped back with exaggerated caution. "Whoa there, almost got our boots dirty," he said, loud enough for his companions to hear. "Guess we should watch where we're going." "Or she should," added another, a woman with sharp features and sharper eyes. "Isn't situational awareness part of the job description?" Diana murmured an apology and started to maneuver her cart around them when the first lieutenant reached out and casually knocked over a spray bottle perched on the edge. "Oops," he said without sincerity. "Guess you'll need to clean that up too." The group continued past her, their laughter echoing down the hallway as Diana knelt to retrieve the fallen bottle and mop up the spilled cleaning solution. As she worked, a shadow fell across the floor beside her. "Need a hand with that?" Diana looked up to see Master Sergeant Paul Gomez, the facilities manager who had hired her 3 years ago. Unlike most others on base, Gomez treated the maintenance staff with respect, perhaps because he understood what it meant to work your way up from the bottom. "I've got it, thanks," Diana said, her voice soft but not submissive. Gomez nodded, then lowered his voice. "Those lieutenants giving you trouble?" "Nothing I can't handle. You know, you could report that kind of behavior. Colonel Bradley has a zero-tolerance policy for harassment of civilian staff." Diana straightened up, adjusting her cap. "It's fine." "Master Sergeant, really?" Gomez studied her for a moment, his dark eyes narrowed slightly. "You always say that. 3 years, and I've never once heard you complain. Not about the hours, the mess, the disrespect, nothing." Diana gave him a small smile, the kind that acknowledged his concern without inviting further conversation. "Some things aren't worth complaining about." "And some things are," he countered. "You work harder than half the commissioned officers on this base, with none of the recognition." "Recognition isn't why I'm here." The statement hung between them. An answer that wasn't really an answer. Gomez had always sensed there was more to Diana Mercer than met the eye, but he'd respected her privacy. Still, sometimes he wondered what drove a woman, with her obvious intelligence and discipline, to seek out work that kept her in the shadows. "Well," he said finally, "if you change your mind about those lieutenants, my door's always open." Diana nodded her thanks and returned to her cart. As she watched Gomez walk away, she absently twisted the ring on her right hand, a habit she'd developed over the years when deep in thought. The heavy gold band was normally hidden beneath her work gloves, its distinctive design and engraving concealed from curious eyes. By afternoon, Diana had made her way to the Tactical Operations Center, a restricted area she was only permitted to clean during specific hours under supervision. Today, that supervision came in the form of Technical Sergeant Miguel Rivera, who was more interested in his phone than in watching the janitor empty trash cans. "Just the common areas," he reminded her without looking up. "Offices are off limits unless an officer is present." "Yes, Sergeant," Diana replied, though she'd been following the same protocol for 3 years. As she worked, she could hear raised voices from behind a partially open door. Colonel Bradley's office. The tactical review for Operation Sandstorm was underway, and from the sound of it, not going well. "These approach vectors are completely wrong," came the colonel's frustrated voice. "Who developed this terrain analysis? It ignores the entire eastern ridge." Diana paused near the door, her experienced ears picking up the sound of papers being shuffled, digital displays being manipulated. "Sir," The simulation parameters were set based on satellite data and previous operations in similar environments. Said another voice, Major Wilson, the head of tactical operations. Then the parameters are flawed, Bradley insisted. I've seen this kind of terrain. You're funneling our people straight into an ambush zone. Deanna continued cleaning, moving slowly to remain within earshot. The Eastern Ridge problem was exactly what she'd noticed in the briefing materials, a fatal flaw that someone with actual field experience in that region would have immediately recognized. She was so focused on the conversation that she didn't notice Technical Sergeant Rivera approaching until he was directly beside her. That area's clean enough, he said sharply. Move on. Diana nodded and pushed her cart forward, away from Colonel Bradley's office and the tactical discussion that could cost lives if the flaws weren't addressed. As she rounded the corner, she heard the sergeant mutter under his breath, "Always trying to listen in on classified briefings, like a janitor would understand military strategy." The tension in the Tactical Operations Center remained high throughout the week. Diana observed the growing frustration as she moved invisibly through the rooms, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces. Operation Sandstorm had evolved from a routine training exercise into a point of contention between Colonel Bradley and his superiors at Central Command, who insisted the original approach was sound despite Bradley's concerns. On Thursday morning, Diana arrived earlier than usual. The night shift had left coffee stains on the conference room table where an emergency meeting had run late, and she wanted to clean them before the morning briefing. As she worked, the door opened behind her. "Who authorized you to be in here?" The sharp voice belonged to Major Wilson, his uniform crisp despite the early hour, his expression hardening when he saw it was just the janitor. "Scheduled cleaning, sir," Diana replied, continuing her work. "Master Sergeant Gomez approved the updated schedule last week." Wilson checked his watch with exaggerated impatience. "Well, hurry it up. We have a classified briefing in 20 minutes. Diana nodded and increased her pace slightly, though her thoroughness never wavered. As she finished with the table and moved to empty the trash bins, she noticed a crumpled sheet of paper on the floor near Wilson's usual seat. Without thinking, she picked it up and glanced at it, a habit from years of making sure she wasn't throwing away anything important. The paper contained a partial terrain map for Operation Sandstorm with handwritten notes in the margins. Diana's eyes scanned it automatically, noting the elevation markers and approach vectors. The Eastern Ridge problem remained unaddressed, but there was something else, something in the weather calculations that didn't account for the seasonal wind patterns in that region. "What are you doing?" Wilson's voice cut through her thoughts. He strode across the room and snatched the paper from her hand. "This is classified material." "I was just making sure it wasn't trash, sir," Diana said, her voice level despite the accusation in his tone. "Everything in this room is classified until designated otherwise," Wilson said, his voice rising. "You don't look at anything. You don't touch anything except trash that's clearly in the bins. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir. I apologize." Wilson studied her face, searching for something, defiance, perhaps, or fear. He found neither, just the same impassive professionalism she always displayed. This seemed to irritate him further. "I've never understood why Bradley allows maintenance staff in secure areas," he muttered, more to himself than to Diana. "It's an unnecessary security risk." Diana returned to her cart, her movements unhurried despite Wilson's glare. As she pushed it toward the door, he called after her. "And make sure you're done with the entire wing by 0800. We don't need distractions." "Today, yes, sir." Outside in the hallway, Diana checked her watch. 0725. Impossible to finish the entire wing in 35 minutes, but she'd learned long ago that pointing out the impossible only made things worse. She'd do what she could and accept the inevitable criticism later. By mid-morning, the base was buzzing with activity. The final review for Operation Sandstorm had brought in several high-ranking officers from other facilities, including Colonel James Reeves from the Pentagon's Joint Special Operations Command. Diana had seen him arrive, watching from a distance as he was greeted with the deference his position commanded. Tall, imposing, with the kind of presence that filled a room before he'd said a word. At lunch, the cafeteria was more crowded than usual. Diana took her tray to the corner table that maintenance staff typically claimed, joining two other janitors and an HVAC technician who were already deep in conversation about weekend plans. She ate quietly, her attention divided between her food and the officers' table across the room where Colonel Bradley was hosting Colonel Reeves and several other visiting officials. "I'm telling you, that new Lieutenant Carver is a piece of work," said Ray, the oldest of the janitors. "Caught him dumping coffee in a trash can I just replaced the liner in. Looked me right in the eye while he did it." "Officers," muttered Sophia, the Vega tech, "think the rules don't apply to them." "Not all of them," Diana said quietly, surprising her companions who rarely heard her contribute to these conversations. "Some understand respect goes both ways," Ray snorted. "Name one who's treated you with respect in the last month." Diana couldn't, so she returned to her meal in silence. As she ate, she noticed Major Wilson approaching Colonel Reeves at the officers' table, a tablet in his hand. They spoke briefly, then Reeves frowned and shook his head, pointing at something on the screen. Wilson's posture stiffened, the universal body language of someone receiving unwelcome criticism. Later that afternoon, Diana was cleaning the women's locker room when Lieutenant Hargrove entered with two other female officers, all of them fresh from physical training and still in workout gear. "God, did you see Wilson's face when Reeves shot down his terrain assessment?" asked one of the officers, a captain Diana didn't recognize. "Thought he was going to have an aneurysm right there. Wilson's been pushing that Eastern approach for weeks," Hargrove replied, opening her locker. "Can't admit he's wrong even when a JSOC colonel tells him directly." "Reeves isn't just any colonel," said the third woman, pulling a towel from her bag. "The man led the Karzai extraction in 7 confirmed kills while carrying a wounded soldier on his back." Diana continued mopping, maintaining a careful distance from the officers while staying close enough to hear their conversation. The Karzai extraction, she knew it well, though not from any official briefing. She'd been there, watching through a rifle scope from a position half a mile away, providing overwatch for the ground team. "Hey, janitor," called Hargrove suddenly. "Could you not mop right where we're standing? Some of us are barefoot here." Diana stopped immediately. "Of course, Lieutenant. I'll come back later." "No, just do the other side first," Hargrove said with a dismissive wave. "We'll be gone in 20 minutes. "Yes, ma'am." Diana moved to the opposite end of the locker room, adjusting her work pattern to accommodate the officers. As she worked, their conversation shifted to personal matters, weekend plans, relationship drama, the usual topics that filled the spaces between professional discussions. "Did anyone see the new tactical consultant they brought in for the Sandstorm review?" asked the captain, her voice lowered slightly. "The civilian? The woman with the Defense Department credentials?" Hargrove replied, "What about her? Just wondering what she's doing here. Doesn't seem like Bradley's type to bring in outside help. Apparently she's some kind of terrain specialist. Reeves brought her in personally." Diana paused momentarily in her mopping, then continued with the same steady rhythm. "A terrain specialist for that region would immediately spot both the ridge issue and the wind pattern problem. Perhaps someone was finally addressing the flaws she'd noticed days ago. Anyway," Hargrove continued, pulling on her uniform shirt, "Wilson's called an all-hands meeting at 1600 to go over the revised approach. Apparently there are significant modifications to the original plan." The officers finished dressing and left, none of them acknowledging Diana as they passed. She completed her work in the now empty locker room, her mind turning over what she'd heard. An all-hands meeting suggested major changes to the operation, changes that might save lives, if they addressed the critical flaws. As she wheeled her cart back to the maintenance area, Diana passed the main conference room where preparations for the meeting were underway. Technical staff were setting up displays and communication equipment under the watchful eye of Master Sergeant Gomez, who nodded to her as she passed. "Busy day," he commented. "Big brass everywhere." "Yes," Diana agreed. "More coffee stains than usual." Gomez chuckled, then lowered his voice. "Colonel Reeves has been asking questions about facility staff. Background checks, security clearances. The works." Diana's expression didn't change, but her grip tightened slightly on the cart handle. "Standard procedure for visiting JSOC personnel." "Maybe," Gomez said, studying her reaction. But he seemed particularly interested in the maintenance staff with access to secured areas. Before Diana could respond, Major Wilson appeared at the conference room door, his face flushed with either exertion or anger, possibly both. "Gomez, where's the civilian consultant? Briefing starts in 30 minutes and she's not in her assigned office." "Dr. Winters?" "I believe Colonel Reeves was showing her the Eastern Perimeter models in the tactical simulation room." Wilson's jaw tightened. Of course he was. Because apparently a civilian consultant outranks the base tactical officer now. He strode off without waiting for a response, nearly colliding with Diana's cart in his haste. He stopped short, his frustration finding a convenient target. "For God's sake, don't you have somewhere else to be? This entire wing is off limits until after the briefing." Diana began to turn her cart around. "Sorry, sir. I don't care what you were just doing," Wilson interrupted. "This is a secure military facility conducting mission-critical operations, not a hotel looking for turn-down service. Clear the area." Gomez stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Major, with respect, my staff has authorized access to—" "Your staff," Wilson said, emphasizing the words with undisguised contempt, "can clean after hours like they're supposed to. I want this corridor clear in 2 minutes." He stormed off, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Gomez turned to Diana, an apology forming on his lips, but she shook her head slightly. "It's fine," she said, her voice calm despite the public dressing down. "I'll finish the West Wing instead." As she turned her cart around, Diana caught sight of a figure at the far end of the corridor, Colonel Reeves, watching the interaction with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met briefly before Diana looked away, pushing her cart toward the exit as instructed. Behind her, she could hear Gomez explaining something to the colonel, their voices too low to make out the words. Diana didn't look back, maintaining her unhurried pace as she rounded the corner, her right hand unconsciously adjusting the ring beneath her glove. The all-hands briefing for Operation Sandstorm began precisely at 1600 hours. Diana had no legitimate reason to be anywhere near the main conference room, but years of experience had taught her that a janitor with cleaning supplies could access almost any area if they projected the right combination of purpose and invisibility. She positioned herself in an adjacent hallway, ostensibly cleaning light fixtures while listening to the muffled voices through the wall. From what she could gather, the tactical approach had indeed been modified, though not as extensively as needed. The Eastern Ridge problem had been acknowledged, but the wind pattern issue remained unaddressed. Diana frowned slightly as she worked, mentally calculating how the seasonal gusts would affect aerial support and drop accuracy in that region. Still, "Here, I see." Diana turned to find Colonel Reeves standing a few feet away, watching her with a measured gaze that suggested he'd been observing her for some time before speaking. Up close, he was more imposing than she'd initially thought. Over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and the weathered face of someone who'd spent significant time in harsh environments. His uniform was impeccable, 4 rows of service ribbons creating a colorful block on his chest. each representing missions and deployments most people would never know about. "Just finishing up, sir," Diana replied, gesturing to the light fixtures. With her cleaning cloth, Reeves nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't particularly concerned with the state of the lighting. "You're Diana Mercer, correct? 3 years on maintenance staff, primarily assigned to administrative and tactical areas." The fact that he knew her name and assignment details was unexpected. Diana maintained her neutral expression, but her mind was racing through possibilities. "Yes, sir." "Master Sergeant Gomez speaks highly of your work ethic," Reeves continued, his tone conversational yet somehow probing. "Says you're always thorough, always on time, never cause problems. I try to do my job well, sir. A commendable attitude." Reeves took a step closer, his voice lowering slightly. "Though I find it interesting that someone with your background would choose this particular facility for employment." Diana's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their motion with the cleaning cloth. "The base offers good benefits for civilian contractors, sir." "I'm sure it does." Reeves smiled slightly, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "Still, there must be more suitable positions for someone with advanced tactical training and field experience." The hallway suddenly felt too narrow, too exposed. Diana carefully set down her cleaning supplies and turned to face the colonel directly. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." "I think you are, Ms. Mercer. Or should I say Major?" "Mercer?" The use of her former rank sent a jolt through Diana's system, a title she hadn't heard directed at her in nearly 4 years. She kept her expression neutral, though she knew her silence was its own form of confirmation. "Your file makes for interesting reading," Reeves continued when she didn't respond. "West Point graduate, top of your class. Distinguished service in Afghanistan and Iraq. Specialized in tactical analysis and terrain-based operation planning until your retirement 4 years ago." Diana met his gaze steadily. "My service record is classified, Colonel. At my clearance level, very little remains classified." Reeves replied, "Including the circumstances of your departure from military service." The implied knowledge hung between them like a physical presence. Diana had spent years burying those memories, constructing a new identity far removed from the decisions and consequences that had ended her military career. "If you've read my file, sir, then you know I'm no longer part of that world," she said finally. "I'm just maintenance staff now." Reeves studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "A waste of expertise, if you ask me. Especially given the current situation with Operation Sandstorm." Before Diana could respond, the conference room doors opened and personnel began streaming out, their faces reflecting varying degrees of concern and frustration. Colonel Bradley emerged deep in conversation with Dr. Winters, the civilian consultant, both of them gesturing to a tablet displaying what appeared to be topographical maps. "The wind patterns make the eastern approach problematic, even with the ridge adjustment," Dr. Winters was saying, her voice carrying the confidence of someone secure in their expertise. "We need to completely recalculate drop zones and extraction points." "That puts us behind schedule by at least 48 hours, Bradley replied, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Command won't approve the delay without solid evidence." "I've provided the meteorological data, Colonel. It's not my fault your tactical team failed to incorporate seasonal variations into their initial assessment." Diana could see Major Wilson trailing behind them, his expression thunderous as he listened to his work being dismantled by an outside consultant. He caught sight of Diana and Reeves in the hallway and immediately altered his course to intercept them. "Colonel," he said, addressing Reeves while pointedly ignoring Diana, "we need your input on the revised timetable." "In a moment, Major," Reeves replied without taking his eyes off Diana. "I'm in the middle of a conversation." Wilson's gaze flicked to Diana, then back to Reeves, disbelief evident in his expression. "With maintenance staff?" with a tactical specialist whose expertise might prove valuable to your operation. Reeves corrected mildly. The statement drew the attention of both Bradley and Dr. Winters, who paused their discussion to look over. Wilson's face flushed with a combination of confusion and indignation. "I don't understand, sir. This is Diana Mercer." "She's a janitor." "At present, yes," Reeves agreed. "Before that, she was Major Diana Mercer, West Point graduate, and one of the most effective tactical analysts in special operations. Her terrain assessments for the Helmand Province operation saved countless lives." The corridor fell silent as all eyes turned to Diana, who stood perfectly still beneath their scrutiny. Her cover, carefully maintained for 3 years, dismantled in a single sentence by a colonel who had no business revealing her past to anyone, regardless of his clearance level. That's not possible," Wilson finally managed. "We would have known. Would you?" Reeves asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. "You've seen her every day for 3 years and never once looked beyond the uniform she's wearing." Dr. Winters stepped forward, her eyes narrowed in concentration. As she studied Diana more carefully, "Mercer," she repeated, recognition dawning. "You wrote the Advanced Terrain Analysis Protocols for Mountain Operations in 2018. I cited your work in my doctoral thesis." Diana remained silent, acutely aware that every word she spoke now would further unravel the anonymous existence she'd constructed. Colonel Bradley moved closer, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing realization. "Major Mercer," he said slowly, testing the name and title together. "From the 5th Special Forces Group?" "7th," Diana corrected automatically, then pressed her lips together, regretting the confirmation. Wilson shook his head, disbelief giving way to suspicion. "This is absurd. If she's some decorated officer, why is she pushing a mop around my base? Where's her proof?" "An excellent question, Major," Reeves replied. "Perhaps you'd be willing to provide that confirmation, Miss Mercer." All eyes remained on Diana, awaiting her response. After a moment's hesitation, she slowly removed her right work glove, revealing the heavy gold ring that had remained hidden beneath it during her shifts. The distinctive design was unmistakable to anyone familiar with military academia, a West Point-class ring, custom engraved with her graduation year and service branch insignia. Colonel Bradley inhaled sharply at the sight, recognition immediate. "That's an academy ring, class of 05 if I'm not mistaken." "04, Diana corrected quietly, turning the ring slightly so the engraving caught the light. "With honors." Dr. Winters moved closer, her academic interest piqued. "The Diana Mercer?" "The one who developed the integrated terrain and meteorological assessment model that revolutionized operation planning in variable environments." Wilson looked from face to face, his expression darkening as he realized he was the only one not connecting the pieces. "This proves nothing. Anyone can buy a ring." "Not this one," Reeves said firmly. "West Point rings are earned, Major, not purchased. And they're certainly not counterfeited by janitors looking to impersonate military officers." The tension in the hallway was broken by the arrival of Master Sergeant Gomez, who took in the scene with a quick glance before addressing Colonel Bradley. "Sir, the secure call from Central Command is waiting in your office. They're requesting an immediate update on the Sandstorm revisions." Bradley nodded, though his attention remained on Diana. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." He turned to Reeves. "Colonel, I think we need to continue this discussion in private. My office, as soon as I'm finished with command." "Agreed," Reeves replied. "And I suggest we include Ms. Mercer in that conversation." Bradley hesitated only briefly before nodding. Again, "Major Wilson, escort Ms. Mercer to the conference room and wait there until we return. Dr. Winters, I'd like you to join us as well." As the group dispersed, Wilson stepped closer to Diana, his voice low and tight with barely controlled anger. "I don't know what game you're playing, But if you've compromised operational security by accessing classified information, you'll be facing serious charges. Diana met his gaze evenly, standing straighter than she had in years, the subservient posture of the maintenance worker falling away like a discarded uniform. I've compromised nothing, Major, but your Eastern approach would have compromised the entire operation if Dr. Winters hadn't identified the wind pattern issue. Wilson's eyes widened slightly at her sudden shift in demeanor, the quiet, deferential janitor replaced by someone who spoke with the unmistakable authority of command experience. You are way out of line. No, Major, Diana replied calmly. For the first time in 3 years, I'm exactly where I need to be. The conference room felt different from this side of the table. Diana sat upright in the chair Wilson had grudgingly offered her, hands folded neatly on the polished surface, the West Point ring now clearly visible on her right hand. The Major paced near the door, occasionally glancing at her with a mixture of suspicion and grudging reassessment. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably until Dr. Winters entered, carrying her tablet and a stack of printed documents. This is fascinating, the consultant said without preamble, setting her materials down across from Diana. I've been reviewing your service record, the unclassified portions, anyway. Your work on the Kandahar operation completely transformed how we approach mountain terrain assessments. Diana inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the praise without responding to it. 4 years of practiced restraint didn't disappear in an instant, even with her cover blown. What I don't understand, Dr. Winters continued, is why someone with your expertise would abandon it all to ... She gestured vaguely. ... Clean floors. Sometimes the quiet life is preferable, Diana replied, her voice low but steady. Fewer complications. Wilson made a derisive noise from his position by the door. Fewer complications? You've been working in a secured military facility under false pretenses. That's the definition of complicated. I never presented false credentials. Diana corrected him. My employment application was completely truthful about my current qualifications. The base needed maintenance staff with security clearance. I applied. I was hired. You deliberately concealed your military background, Wilson pressed. I didn't conceal it. I simply didn't volunteer information that wasn't requested. Diana's gaze remained level. My past service wasn't relevant to mopping floors and emptying trash cans. The door opened before Wilson could respond, admitting Colonels Bradley and Reeves. Both men had the tight expressions of officers who had just endured a difficult conversation with their superiors. Bradley took the seat at the head of the table while Reeves positioned himself near the window, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. Central Command is concerned about the timeline, Bradley began without preamble. They've reluctantly approved a 24-hour delay to incorporate Dr. Winters' meteorological adjustments, but they're insisting the operation proceed no later than 600 Saturday. That's not enough time, Dr. Winters protested. We need at least 48 hours to properly recalculate all the variables and run adequate simulations. Which is why we're here, Reeves interjected, his gaze shifting to Diana. Major Mercer's expertise in rapid terrain assessment might be exactly what we need. Wilson stepped forward, his expression incredulous. Sir, with all due respect, we can't seriously be considering bringing a janitor into a classified tactical operation, regardless of her alleged previous experience. Your concern is noted, Major, Bradley replied, his tone making it clear the subject was not up for debate. However, Colonel Reeves has confirmed Major Mercer's identity and credentials with multiple sources. Her expertise is both relevant and potentially critical to the success of Operation Sandstorm. Diana remained silent throughout this exchange, her expression neutral as they discussed her as though she weren't present, a familiar experience from her years in maintenance, though the context had shifted dramatically. What I'd like to know, Bradley continued, turning his attention directly to Diana, is why one of the most promising tactical analysts in the Army chose to disappear into civilian life only to resurface as maintenance staff at my base. All eyes turned to Diana, awaiting an explanation that she'd spent 4 years avoiding. She weighed her options carefully, aware that her response would shape whatever came next. The official record states I received an honorable discharge following injury sustained during the classified operation, she said finally. That part is true, as far as it goes. And the unofficial record? Reeves prompted when she paused. Diana met his gaze steadily. The unofficial record includes a tactical assessment I submitted for Operation Blackwater that was ignored by command. They proceeded with the original plan despite my warnings about terrain vulnerabilities in the northern approach. The room grew quieter, the air heavier with unspoken understanding. Military officers recognized the implications immediately. An operation gone wrong, warnings unheeded, consequences severe. We lost 17 personnel that day, Diana continued, her voice remaining even through what was clearly practiced control, including my entire tactical team. The official investigation concluded that unforeseen terrain conditions contributed to the operation's failure. Unforeseen by everyone except you, Dr. Winters observed quietly. I submitted my resignation the day the report was published. They convinced me to accept a medical discharge instead, cleaner for everyone involved. Wilson had stopped pacing, his expression shifting as the pieces fell into place. Blackwater. That was the failed extraction attempt in the Korangal Valley in 2019. Yes, Diana confirmed. A disaster that was entirely preventable if someone had listened to the terrain specialist they'd assigned to the operation. The implications hung in the air like smoke. The parallels to the current situation with Operation Sandstorm were impossible to ignore. An operation with flawed terrain assessment, concerns being minimized in favor of timeline adherence, potential casualties dismissed as acceptable risks. Colonel Bradley leaned forward, his hands clasped before him. And after your discharge, you decided to work as a janitor at a military base because it was quiet, Diana replied simply. Because no one asks the maintenance staff for their opinion on tactical matters. Because watching from the sidelines meant never having to write another report that would be ignored at the cost of soldiers' lives. Reeves moved from the window to stand behind an empty chair. Until now, when you recognized the same patterns that led to the Blackwater failure being repeated with Sandstorm. Diana didn't confirm or deny this assessment, but her silence was answer enough. Bradley studied her for a long moment before turning to Dr. Winters. Your assessment of the wind pattern issue, how serious is it? The consultant straightened, clearly appreciating being brought back into the conversation. Critical. The seasonal winds in that region can reach up to 40 knots in unpredictable gusts. Without proper compensation, aerial support would be compromised and drop accuracy reduced by approximately 30%, which means missed targets, compromised extract routes, and potential casualties. Diana added quietly. Bradley nodded slowly, the weight of command evident in his expression. And you believe 24 hours is insufficient to properly address these issues? I do, Dr. Winters confirmed. The computational models alone take 8 hours, Diana interrupted. If you're using standard sequential processing, 4 with parallel algorithms and the right expertise. All eyes turned back to her. Dr. Winters looked skeptical. The integrated meteorological and terrain variables create millions of data points. Processing that in 4 hours would require the Mercer method. Diana finished for her. The same algorithm you cited in your doctoral thesis. I developed it specifically for time-sensitive operations where standard assessment protocols were too slow. Wilson made a sound of disbelief. You expect us to believe you can solve in hours what our entire tactical team couldn't resolve in weeks. I don't expect you to believe anything, Major. Diana replied without heat. I'm simply stating facts. Whether you choose to act on them is not my decision to make. Colonel Bradley exchanged a long look with Reeves before turning back to Diana. If we were to request your assistance with this operation, officially as a consultant rather than maintenance staff, would you be willing to provide it? The question hung in the air between them, an offer to step back into the world she deliberately left behind, to risk having her expertise ignored once again, to shoulder responsibility for lives she'd chosen to stop carrying. Diana's hand moved unconsciously to touch her West Point ring, the weight of it familiar yet strange. After years hidden beneath work gloves. Under what conditions? Full access to all operational data, Bradley replied immediately. Direct input on tactical planning. Your assessment would be given priority consideration in the final approach determination. Priority consideration is not the same as implementation, Diana observed. No, it's not, Bradley acknowledged. Ultimate operational authority remains with command. But your input would be treated with the respect your experience warrants. Diana considered this for a moment before responding. And after the operation? What then? It was Reeves who answered. That would be up to you, Major. Your skills are wasted pushing a mop. The Pentagon would welcome your return to active service in whatever capacity you'd be willing to consider. Diana's gaze moved slowly around the conference room, taking in the faces watching her with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and respect. The decision before her wasn't simply about one operation. It represented a complete reversal of the path she'd chosen 4 years ago when she walked away from everything she'd worked toward since West Point. I'll provide consultation for Operation Sandstorm, she said finally. But I make no commitments beyond that. When this operation concludes, I return to civilian status unless I decide otherwise. Bradley nodded. Agreed. We'll draw up temporary consultant credentials immediately. He turned to Wilson. Major, I want all Sandstorm data transferred to the secure tactical room within the hour. Full access for Ms. Mercer. Wilson's jaw tightened, but he nodded sharply. Yes, sir. He glanced at Diana, clearly struggling to reconcile the janitor he'd dismissed with the tactical specialist he was now required to accommodate. I'll need authorization codes to grant system access. Use mine for now, Reeves interjected, handing Wilson a security card. Pentagon override should clear any access issues until her consultant status is formalized. Bradley stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Dr. Winters, you'll work directly with Ms. Mercer on the meteorological integration. I want preliminary revisions ready for review by 0800 tomorrow. Colonel, Diana interrupted, rising from her chair with a fluid confidence that made several people in the room blink in surprise. The submissive posture of the maintenance worker had vanished entirely, replaced by the bearing of a commissioned officer. Before we proceed, I need one thing clarified. Bradley raised an eyebrow, which is, my assessment will not be treated as a suggestion or a contingency option. If I identify critical flaws in the operation planning, those flaws will be addressed before deployment, regardless of timeline pressures from command. The boldness of the demand created a momentary tension in the room. Wilson looked scandalized. Dr. Winters impressed, and Reeves faintly amused. Bradley studied Diana for a long moment before responding. You're in no position to make demands, Ms. Mercer. On the contrary, Colonel, Diana replied evenly. You're asking me to step back into a role I deliberately left because my expertise was ignored with fatal consequences. I won't be responsible for that happening again. Either my assessment carries the weight it deserves, or I return to my maintenance duties, and you proceed without me. The two locked eyes in a silent battle of wills that made the others in the room shift uncomfortably. Finally, Bradley gave a curt nod. Critical safety concerns will be addressed before deployment. You have my word. Thank you, sir. Diana's posture relaxed slightly. In that case, I'll need a change of clothes before we begin. This uniform isn't appropriate for the tactical room." An hour later, Deanna stood in the secure Tactical Operations Center, dressed in standard issue BDU pants and a black t-shirt borrowed from supply. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, revealing features that seemed sharper, more defined without the shadow of her maintenance cap. The room was filled with screens displaying topographical maps, weather data, and operational timelines for Operation Sandstorm. Dr. Winters worked at a nearby console, occasionally glancing up to watch Diana as she moved methodically through the digital terrain models, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The transformation was so complete that several junior officers who entered the room looked straight past her, assuming she was part of the regular tactical team until someone informed them otherwise. "This is wrong," Diana said suddenly, zooming in on a section of the mountain range where the operation was planned. "The gradient calculations for the northern slopes are based on outdated survey data." Dr. Winters moved to stand beside her, studying the screen. "The topographical maps were updated last month based on satellite imagery." "Satellite imagery doesn't account for seasonal erosion patterns," Diana replied, pulling up a different data set. "This region experiences significant groundwater saturation during spring months, which alters load-bearing capacity and slope stability." She quickly input a series of calculations, modifying the terrain model to incorporate these variables. The revised gradient values appeared in red, showing substantial differences from the original assessment. "That changes everything about the northern insertion point," Dr. Winters murmured, immediately seeing the implications. "The original landing zone would be completely unstable under these conditions." "Precisely," Deanna confirmed, already mapping alternative approaches. "We need to shift the insertion at least 2 kilometers west to find stable ground, which affects the entire northern tactical approach." Major Wilson entered the tactical room just as Diana was completing these modifications. He paused in the doorway, observing the scene with a mixture of reluctance and curiosity before approaching. "Colonel Bradley has requested a preliminary update," he announced, pointedly addressing Dr. Winters rather than Diana. "We've identified significant issues with the northern insertion point." Dr. Winters responded, gesturing to the modified terrain model. "Ms. Mercer has calculated seasonal erosion effects that weren't factored into the original assessment." Wilson's gaze shifted to the screen, then to Diana. "Those calculations would take days to verify through standard channels." "Which is why standard channels often miss critical variables in time-sensitive operations," Diana replied without looking up from her work. "The Mercer method integrates seasonal patterns with geological composition to predict terrain stability without requiring physical verification." "The Mercer method," Wilson repeated, a note of recognition finally entering his voice. "You really are that Diana Mercer." "I am," she confirmed, finally turning to face him directly. "The same Diana Mercer who spent the last 3 years emptying your trash and cleaning your coffee spills while you ignored her existence." Wilson had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I didn't know." "No, you didn't," Diana cut him off. "And that's precisely the problem. Major, you made assumptions based on a uniform rather than looking for competence regardless of its packaging." The rebuke hung in the air between them, its accuracy preventing any legitimate defense. After an awkward silence, Wilson cleared his throat. "What's your assessment of the overall operation timeline given these new variables?" It was a professional question, the first time he had addressed her as a tactical specialist rather than maintenance staff. Diana recognized the olive branch for what it was and responded in kind. "The northern approach needs complete reconfiguration, which affects coordination with the eastern and southern teams. We're looking at a minimum 36-hour delay for proper implementation." "Command won't approve 36 hours, Wilson said immediately. "They barely gave us 24. Then we need to make them understand the consequences of proceeding without these adjustments," Diana replied. I can provide historical data from similar operations where terrain stability was compromised, including casualty statistics. Wilson's expression darkened, like Operation Blackwater. Among others, yes. Diana held his gaze steadily. I've watched this scenario play out before, Major. I won't be party to it happening again. The tension was interrupted by Colonel Reeves. Entering the tactical room, followed by several senior officers Diana didn't recognize. Conversation ceased as everyone straightened reflexively in the presence of superior officers. "Gentlemen, this is Diana Mercer," Reeves announced, gesturing toward her with a formality that made it clear he was establishing her position in the hierarchy. Former Major, West Point graduate, and the military's leading expert on integrated terrain assessment. She'll be overseeing the tactical revisions for Operation Sandstorm. The officers nodded acknowledgement, though Diana could read the skepticism in several faces. One of them, a gray-haired colonel with artillery insignia, stepped forward. "Mercer? The one who developed the rapid assessment protocols for mountain operations?" "Yes, sir," Diana confirmed. "Your work saved my unit in the Hindu Kush in 2017, he said, extending his hand. "Colonel James Thornton, 10th Mountain Division. We implemented your protocol modifications after losing 3 men to terrain collapse. Didn't lose another after that." Diana accepted the handshake, surprised by the unexpected recognition. "I'm glad to hear it was effective, Colonel." "More than effective," Thornton replied. "Revolutionary. We've been implementing your methodologies ever since." He glanced around the tactical room. "Though I heard you'd left service. Didn't expect to find you here." "It's a recent development," Diana said diplomatically. Reeves stepped forward, redirecting the conversation. "Major Wilson, what's the status of the Northern Approach revisions?" As Wilson began summarizing Diana's findings, she returned to the terrain models, letting the technical discussion flow around her while she focused on the work. It felt strange yet familiar to be back in this environment. The rapid exchange of tactical information, the pressure of timeline constraints, the weight of lives depending on accurate assessment. By evening, word had spread throughout the base about the janitor who was actually a decorated former officer now running the Tactical Operations Center. Diana remained oblivious to most of the gossip, immersed in revising operational parameters and running simulation models to validate her adjustments. When she finally emerged from the tactical room after midnight, she found Master Sergeant Gomez waiting in the corridor, holding a duffel bag. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her the bag. "Gathered some of your things from your quarters. Figured you wouldn't be heading back there anytime soon." Diana accepted the bag gratefully. "Thank you, Paul." Gomez studied her for a moment, taking in the uniform, the confident posture, the subtle but significant changes in her demeanor. "Always knew there was more to you than met the eye," he said finally. "Though I'll admit, I didn't expect this." Diana smiled slightly. "Neither did I, to be honest." "For what it's worth," Gomez added, lowering his voice, "the maintenance staff is proud as hell. Watching those officers who treated you like furniture suddenly scrambling to get on your good side. Best entertainment this base has seen in years." A genuine laugh escaped Diana, perhaps her first since arriving at Mitchell Air Force Base 3 years ago. "I hadn't thought about it that way." "Well, you should," Gomez grinned. Lieutenant Hargrove nearly had a conniption when she heard who you really are. Apparently, she's been complaining about your mopping technique to anyone who would listen for months. "I'm aware," Diana replied dryly. Her complaints were quite detailed. "Well, she's singing a different tune now," Gomez assured her. "Half the officers on base are suddenly claiming they always knew there was something special about you." Diana shook her head, amused despite her exhaustion. "Funny how perception works." "Funny isn't the word I'd use," Gomez said, his expression turning more serious. "But justice might be." By 06:00 the next morning, Diana had transformed the Tactical Operations Center into a hive of focused activity. Officers who had barely acknowledged her existence the day before now listened intently as she outlined revised approach vectors and contingency protocols. The modified terrain models displayed on the main screen showed the northern insertion point relocated 2 kilometers west, with corresponding adjustments to all supporting elements. The western ridge provides natural cover for the approach, Diana explained, highlighting a section of the digital map. More importantly, it maintains stable ground conditions regardless of seasonal moisture levels. Colonel Bradley studied the revisions with careful attention, occasionally asking questions that revealed his own extensive field experience. Unlike some of the other officers, he showed no discomfort taking direction from someone he'd previously known only as maintenance staff. "These changes are substantial," he observed after Diana had completed her briefing. "What's your confidence level in the new approach?" "With these modifications, 92% success probability based on terrain and meteorological factors," Diana replied. The original plan was hovering around 65% at best, though that estimate was optimistic given the unaddressed variables. Dr. Winters nodded agreement from her workstation. "The integrated model shows dramatic improvement in all key metrics, MZs. Mercer's algorithms process terrain variables with remarkable precision." Lieutenant Hargrove entered the tactical room, carrying a stack of updated briefing materials. She faltered momentarily upon seeing Diana, directing the operation from the central console, the position traditionally occupied by the highest-ranking tactical officer present. The lieutenant's eyes widened slightly as she took in Diana's transformed appearance and authoritative presence. "The updated mission packets, ma'am," Hargrove said, approaching Diana with the documents. The ma'am emerged with visible effort, a conscious correction from someone who had spent months addressing the same person with barely concealed contempt. "Thank you, Lieutenant," Diana replied evenly, accepting the materials without acknowledging the awkwardness of their role reversal. "Please distribute these to the section leads. We'll need their feedback within the hour." Hargrove hesitated, clearly wanting to say something more, but unsure how to navigate this new dynamic. I wanted to apologize for. This isn't the time, Lieutenant," Diana interrupted, her tone professional rather than punitive. "We have an operation to salvage. Personal matters can wait." "Yes, ma'am," Hargrove replied, her cheeks flushing slightly as she turned to distribute the packets. Colonel Reeves, who had been observing from the periphery, moved to stand beside Diana at the main console. "You've accomplished more in 12 hours than the entire tactical team managed in 2 weeks, he remarked quietly. "Impressive, though not surprising given your record." Diana continued adjusting parameters on the screen. Before her, the tactical team was working with incomplete data and flawed baseline assumptions. "It's not entirely their fault." "Diplomatic of you," Reeves noted with a hint of amusement, "especially considering how some of them treated you." "Professional competence and personal behavior are separate issues, Colonel," Diana replied. "I'm here to ensure this operation succeeds with minimal casualties, not to settle scores. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel." "Noble sentiment," Reeves said, studying her profile. "Though I suspect not everyone would be so magnanimous in your position." Before Diana could respond, Major Wilson approached with a satellite phone in hand. "Central Command on Secure Line 1, he announced. "They're requesting a direct briefing on the tactical revisions." Diana straightened, suddenly aware that she was about to justify her modifications to senior commanders who might still view her as the base janitor despite her reinstated credentials. Bradley moved to take the phone, but Reeves intercepted him with a subtle gesture. "Ms. Mercer should handle this briefing personally," Reeves suggested. "Her analysis, her defense." Bradley considered this before nodding agreement. The tactical Operation Center is yours, Ms. Mercer. Central Command is waiting. Diana accepted the satellite phone, aware of the eyes watching her throughout the room. This was a test, not just of her tactical assessment, but of her ability to command respect. From the highest levels of military authority, she activated the secure line with practiced ease. "This is Diana Mercer, tactical consultant for Operation Sandstorm," she began, her voice clear and confident. "I understand you have questions about the proposed modifications." What followed was a 20-minute technical briefing where Diana methodically defended every change she'd implemented, citing historical data, predictive algorithms, and terrain stability factors with the precision that had once made her one of the Pentagon's most valued tactical analysts. The officers in the room listened in growing admiration as she systematically dismantled objections from generals who outranked everyone present. "With respect, General," they heard her say at one point, "proceeding with the original northern approach would place your personnel at unacceptable risk. The seasonal erosion patterns in that region have compromised ground stability by approximately 40% compared to baseline surveys. I've uploaded the comparative analysis to your secure server." There was a pause while the general presumably reviewed the data. Diana waited patiently, her expression betraying nothing of the tension evident in other faces around her. "Yes, sir," she continued eventually. "The 36-hour delay is unavoidable if you want this operation to succeed. I've provided 3 historical examples of similar terrain conditions where commanders proceeded despite stability warnings. All 3 resulted in casualties that could have been prevented." Another pause, longer this time. Diana's grip on the phone tightened slightly, the only visible indication of her concern. "General, I understand the timeline pressures, but physics and geology don't respond to operational deadlines. The ground in that region will not support your insertion teams at the originally designated coordinates. That's not an opinion. It's a mathematical certainty." The room had gone completely silent, officers exchanging glances as Diana spoke with a directness few would dare use with Central Command. After another tense moment, her posture relaxed slightly. "Thank you, sir. I believe that's the right decision. My team will finalize the revised operational timeline within the hour." She lowered the phone, ending the call, and turned to face the expectant faces. "Central Command has approved the 36-hour delay and all tactical modifications. Operation Sandstorm is rescheduled for 1800 hours Saturday." A collective exhale of relief swept through the room. Bradley stepped forward, clearly impressed. "Well done, Ms. Mercer. Few tactical analysts could have convinced General Harrington so quickly." "She didn't just convince him," Colonel Thornton remarked from the doorway, where he'd been listening to the exchange. "She educated him. That's a rare skill." Diana acknowledged the compliment with a slight nod before turning back to the tactical display. "We still have considerable work to complete before deployment. Dr. Winters, what's the status of the wind pattern integration for aerial support?" As the tactical team resumed their tasks with renewed focus, Diana felt a familiar rhythm returning, the concentrated flow of operational planning, the careful balance of variables and contingencies, the weight of responsibility that came with decisions affecting lives in the field. It was a world she had deliberately left behind, yet it welcomed her back as though she had never left. During a brief break for coffee, Diana found herself approached by a young sergeant she recognized from the maintenance staff break room, someone who had always treated her with basic courtesy, if not particular attention. "Ma'am," the sergeant began hesitantly, "I just wanted to say we often ate lunch in the same room, and I never realized who I was." Diana finished for him, softening the observation with a small smile. "That was rather the point. Sergeant, don't trouble yourself about it." "It's not that, ma'am," he corrected. "It's that I never thanked you. My older brother was part of the extraction team in Helmand Province in 2018. He told me they survived because some tactical analyst named Mercer insisted they alter their approach due to something about seasonal terrain shifts. I just never made the connection until now. Diana stilled, the coffee cup halfway to her lips. Your brother was with the 75th Rangers? Yes, ma'am. Staff Sergeant James Conley. He said your terrain assessment saved their entire unit. The name brought immediate recognition, a mission she'd nearly forgotten among dozens of others. A last-minute adjustment to an extraction route based on subtle indicators most analysts would have missed. She hadn't known the outcomes of many of her assessments after leaving service. The Pentagon wasn't in the habit of updating former officers on classified operations. I'm glad he made it home, Sergeant, she said simply. So is our family, ma'am. The sergeant hesitated, then added, he's got 3 kids now. Youngest one born just last month. The weight of this information, lives continued, families formed, futures unfolding from decisions made years ago in tactical rooms, not unlike this one, settled around Diana's shoulders. Not the crushing burden of lives lost that had driven her from service, but something different. Something that felt almost like purpose. The moment was interrupted by Colonel Reeves appearing at her elbow. Ms. Mercer, a word? She excused herself from the sergeant and followed Reeves to a quieter corner of the room. His expression was serious, his voice lowered for privacy. I just received word from Pentagon Personnel Division. They've expedited reinstatement paperwork should you choose to return to active duty. Your previous rank would be restored, with consideration for promotion based on time in service. Diana's expression remained neutral despite the unexpected news. I haven't decided if that's what I want, Colonel. Understood, Reeves acknowledged. But the offer is there. The military doesn't often admit its mistakes, Diana, but sidelining you was clearly one of them. There are people at the highest levels who remember your contributions. She studied him for a moment, considering his motivations. Why are you doing this, Colonel? You didn't come to Mitchell Air Force Base by accident. You knew who I was before you arrived. Reeves smiled slightly. Let's just say I've spent the past year tracking down specialized talent that the military has overlooked or misplaced. Your name was at the top of my list. For what purpose? A new joint task force focused on preventative tactical assessment. Reeves replied, identifying potential operation failures before they occur rather than analyzing them afterward. Your work on the Blackwater operation, though ignored at the time, demonstrated exactly the kind of foresight we're looking to institutionalize. The irony wasn't lost on Diana, being recruited for an approach that had ended her military career when it was dismissed by the very institution now seeking to adopt it. Before she could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the tactical operations center. Red warning lights flashed as personnel rushed to their stations. What's happening? Diana asked, immediately alert. Incoming priority transmission from the field. An operations specialist called out. Reconnaissance team reporting immediate terrain destabilization at the original northern insertion coordinates. Diana moved swiftly to the main console, Reeves close behind. The satellite feed showed a massive landslide in progress exactly where the original operation had planned to insert the primary team. The precise location Diana had identified as dangerously unstable. Get me Central Command, she ordered, the authority in her voice causing immediate compliance despite her consultant status. They need to see this now. As the communication links were established, Diana turned to find Colonel Bradley already at her shoulder, his expression grim as he watched the destruction unfold on screen. If we hadn't changed the insertion point ... he began, we would be watching our personnel get buried under several thousand tons of rock and soil, Diana finished quietly. Exactly as happened in Blackwater 4 years ago. The satellite footage of the landslide became the defining moment of Operation Sandstorm's revision process. Central Command, faced with undeniable visual evidence of what would have been a catastrophic failure, immediately granted Diana complete authority over all remaining tactical adjustments. The 36-hour delay extended to 48 hours as she insisted on thorough verification of every terrain-dependent element of the operation. "That would have been our entire Alpha team," Lieutenant Hargrove whispered, standing transfixed before the monitor displaying the devastation. The massive scar of Earth where solid ground had given way extended precisely through what would have been the primary landing zone. 37 personnel. Diana worked with quiet intensity at the main console, already integrating the new data into her models. "This confirms the erosion predictors were accurate. We need to reassess all secondary insertion points with the updated parameters." General Harrington himself had called from Central Command after viewing the footage. His earlier resistance completely evaporated. "Ms. Mercer, you have full operational discretion," he'd told her, the satellite connection barely masking the shock in his voice. "Whatever resources you need are at your disposal." Word of the near miss spread rapidly throughout Mitchell Air Force Base. Personnel who had never interacted with Diana during her 3 years in maintenance now found reasons to pass by the tactical operations center, hoping to glimpse the woman whose expertise had potentially saved dozens of lives before the operation had even begun. Junior officers who had casually dismissed her scrambled to demonstrate their professionalism whenever she entered a room. "It's like watching the world's most satisfying role reversal," Dr. Winters commented as they worked side by side, calibrating wind pattern variables for the aerial support elements. "Though you don't seem to be enjoying it much." Diana's fingers continued moving across the keyboard without hesitation. "This isn't about vindication, Doctor. It's about preventing history from repeating itself. Can't it be both?" Winters pressed. "You spent 3 years being treated as invisible by people who now can't stop talking about you. There's a certain justice in that." "Justice would have been having my assessment heeded 4 years ago," Diana replied quietly. 17 personnel who didn't come home. Their families don't get vindication." Winters fell silent, chastened by the reminder of what had driven Diana from service in the first place. The conversation shifted back to technical parameters, the personal dimension set aside in favor of operational focus. By evening, the Tactical Operations Center had been transformed. What had once been a standard military planning facility now incorporated specialized workstations implementing Diana's integrated assessment methodologies. Officers who had initially resisted her modifications now advocated for them. Having seen the potential consequences of the original approach, Major Wilson, who had undergone perhaps the most dramatic shift in attitude, approached Diana as she reviewed final adjustments to the Eastern approach vectors. His initial hostility had given way to a cautious professional respect that bordered on deference. "Ms. Mercer, the terrain stability assessment for the secondary extraction route is complete," he reported, handing her a tablet displaying the results. "All parameters well within safety tolerances, even accounting for potential precipitation." Diana reviewed the data carefully before nodding approval. "Good work, Major. Your team is adapting well to the new methodology." Wilson hesitated, clearly wanting to say more but struggling to find the appropriate words. "I owe you an apology," he finally managed. "My behavior was unprofessional and my judgment flawed." "Your judgment of me or of the operational parameters?" Diana asked, her tone neutral rather than accusatory. "Both," Wilson admitted. "I allowed appearance and position to influence my assessment of expertise. It was a fundamental failure of leadership." Diana regarded him thoughtfully. His remorse appeared genuine, though whether it stemmed from true insight or simply the professional embarrassment of being so dramatically proven wrong remained unclear. "The military trains us to recognize patterns, Major," she said finally. "Sometimes that creates efficiency, and sometimes it creates blind spots. The challenge is knowing the difference. Wilson nodded, accepting the measured response without pushing for explicit forgiveness. The revised operation briefing is scheduled for 0800 tomorrow. Colonel Bradley has requested you lead the presentation to all team leaders. I'll be ready. Diana confirmed, turning back to her console to indicate the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. As Wilson departed, Colonel Reeves approached from the observation area where he'd been monitoring progress. "You're being remarkably gracious to people who didn't extend you the same courtesy," he noted. "Holding grudges compromises operational efficiency," Diana replied with the hint of a smile, revealing a flash of dry humor beneath her professional demeanor. "Besides, they're good officers learning a difficult lesson. The mission benefits from their improved perspective." Reeves leaned against the adjacent workstation, studying her with evident admiration. "You know, most people who prove themselves right so dramatically would take at least a moment to enjoy it." "I'm not most people," Diana said simply. "No," Reeves agreed. "You're not, which is precisely why the Pentagon wants you back." Diana's hands stilled on the keyboard. "The operation isn't complete yet, Colonel. Let's focus on the task at hand before discussing what comes next." "Fair enough," Reeves conceded, "though I hope you're giving it serious consideration. Talents like yours are rare and needed now more than ever." Before Diana could respond, Master Sergeant Gomez appeared at the tactical room entrance, looking distinctly out of place among the officers and specialists. He carried a small box, approaching Diana with a mixture of pride and hesitation. "Sorry to interrupt, ma'am," he said, reverting to military formality despite their years of casual workplace interaction. "The maintenance staff wanted you to have this." Diana accepted the box with a questioning look. Inside was a coffee mug, standard military issue, but with Major Mercer stenciled on one side and Tactical Genius, former janitor, on the other. The gesture, both respectful and gently teasing, brought an unexpected lump to her throat. "They're all pulling for you," Gomez added quietly. "Thought you should know that." "Thank you, Paul," Diana replied, genuine warmth in her voice. "Please convey my appreciation." As Gomez departed, Reeves nodded toward the mug with amusement. "I'd say you've developed quite the fan base." "The maintenance staff always knew who I really was," Diana said, placing the mug carefully on her workstation. "They just didn't know my history. They respected me based on how I treated them, not my credentials or background." "A lesson many officers could benefit from learning," Reeves observed. The night progressed with methodical efficiency as final preparations for Operation Sandstorm took shape. Diana worked tirelessly, moving between workstations to verify calculations, test contingencies, and ensure every aspect of the revised plan incorporated the lessons so painfully learned from past failures. By midnight, the operations center had emptied except for essential personnel, leaving Diana alone at the main console, reviewing simulation results for the 7th time. Colonel Bradley found her there, her focus so complete that she didn't notice his approach until he spoke. "You should get some rest," he suggested, his tone more concerned than commanding. "You've been at this for nearly 48 hours straight." Diana straightened, rolling tension from her shoulders. "Just finishing the final verification check, sir." "Which you've already run multiple times," Bradley pointed out. "The operation is solid, Ms. Mercer. The most comprehensive tactical planning I've seen in 30 years of service." He gestured to a chair beside her, silently requesting permission to join her. When she nodded, he settled himself with the weary ease of a career officer who had endured countless late nights in operation centers. "May I speak frankly?" he asked after a moment. "Of course, sir." "I've been thinking about why you chose this facility," Bradley began. "Of all the places you could have disappeared to after your discharge, you selected a military base with an active tactical operations division. That seems deliberate." Diana considered his observation, weighing how much to reveal. "I needed To be somewhere familiar, she said finally. Somewhere with structure. And yes, somewhere I could keep an eye on operations without being directly involved. Until you couldn't stay on the sidelines any longer, Bradley finished for her. I tried, Diana admitted. For 3 years, I watched operations developed with the same flawed approaches that led to Blackwater. Most succeeded despite their weaknesses. Some resulted in unnecessary complications. None were catastrophic enough to justify intervention. Until Sandstorm, Bradley said, understanding dawning in his expression. You recognized the pattern immediately, Diana nodded. The same terrain type, the same seasonal conditions, the same command pressure to proceed despite warning signs. It was Blackwater all over again, just with different coordinates. And you couldn't let it happen twice, Bradley concluded. Even if it meant sacrificing the anonymity you'd built. Some prices are worth paying, Diana said quietly, her hand moving unconsciously to touch the West Point ring that now remained visible on her finger. I left service because I couldn't prevent those deaths. I couldn't stay silent watching the same mistakes being repeated. Bradley studied her for a long moment, respect evident in his gaze. For what it's worth, I believe you found your way. Back to where you belong, Major. This is the work you were trained for, the work you excel at. The question is whether you're ready to reclaim it fully. Diana glanced around the Tactical Operations Center, at the screens displaying her revised assessments, the workstations implementing her methodologies, the operation taking shape under her guidance. For the first time in 4 years, she felt the weight of responsibility as something other than a burden. It felt improbably like purpose restored. I haven't decided yet, she answered honestly. But I'm considering it more seriously than I expected to. Bradley nodded, satisfied with her response. Whatever you decide, you've earned the right to make that choice on your own terms. He rose from his chair, straightening his uniform. 0800 briefing, Major. After that, history takes its course. Yes, sir, Diana replied, the familiar response coming naturally after years of disuse. As Bradley departed, she turned back to the console, but her attention had shifted from the technical details before her to the unexpected path that had led her back to this moment, from decorated officer to anonymous janitor to tactical leadership. In the space of 72 hours, the West Point ring caught the light as she reached for her newly acquired coffee mug. 3 years of hiding beneath work gloves, of watching silently from the sidelines, had ended the moment Colonel Reeves had recognized what others had been too blind to see. The question remaining was whether the revelation would lead her forward into a reclaimed identity, or back to the shadows she had deliberately chosen. The morning of Operation Sandstorm's deployment arrived with clear skies and optimal conditions. Diana stood in the command center, watching as teams executed her revised plan with flawless precision. Every insertion point held stable, every weather calculation proved accurate, every contingency unnecessary. When confirmation of mission success came 18 hours later, the command center erupted in celebration, all except Diana, who accepted the news with quiet satisfaction rather than jubilation. 1 week later, Diana entered Mitchell Air Force Base wearing neither a janitor's uniform nor tactical gear, but the formal dress uniform of a lieutenant colonel, a promotion accompanying her reinstatement to active duty. The brass insignia caught the morning light as she made her way across the courtyard, where she had once swept debris unnoticed. Lieutenant Hargrove snapped to attention as Diana passed. Congratulations on your promotion, ma'am. Thank you, Lieutenant. Diana replied with a small smile. I trust the eastern corridor has been properly mopped this morning. Hargrove flushed but returned the smile, accepting the gentle reminder with good grace. In Colonel Bradley's office, Diana found both Bradley and Reeves waiting with her new orders, leadership of the Pentagon's Advanced Terrain Assessment Division, a unit created specifically around her expertise. The maintenance staff left you a going-away present, Bradley said, handing her a small package. Inside was a custom-made challenge coin bearing the janitor's closet room number on one side and her West Point class insignia on the other. The message was clear: never forget where you've been or who you truly are. Diana slipped the coin into her pocket, a permanent reminder that excellence exists in unexpected places, sometimes hiding in plain sight, pushing a mop, waiting for the right moment to emerge. If this story touched you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our Hidden Heroes community. Share in the comments if you've ever been underestimated or if you know someone whose talents went unrecognized until a pivotal moment changed everything. New inspirational stories every week about ordinary people with extraordinary abilities. Remember, sometimes the most remarkable people are hiding in plain sight, maybe even mopping your floors. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next uplifting tale. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to our channel.